And we're live. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Victoria Koreneva, short is Vita. I am a mezzo-soprano and a co-founder of DictionBuddy. We also have Emma Lavandier, who is also a mezzo-soprano and a co-founder of DictionBuddy. We are very happy to also have a man among our mix, but not in the live feed. It's Kofi Hayford, who is also our co-founder. Today is a very special day and a special interview that we've prepared for you. Our guest is Cheri Montgomery. Welcome, Cheri.
Thank you.
We're very happy to have you. And let me just go ahead and jump in to announce your accolades. You're very, very accomplished and multi-talented. So we are really excited to host today's interview with you. Cheri is a member of the voice faculty at Blair School of Music of Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. She's also the author of 12 titles on the topic of voice and diction. Just a few titles I'm going to mention. The Lyric Diction Workbook series includes 6 titles for English, Italian, German, French, Latin, and Advanced French Lyric Diction courses. The IPA Handbook for Singers, Phonetic Readings for Lyric Diction and Phonetic Transcription for Lyric Diction, Diction for Singers and the Singer's Daily Practice Journal, and a very impressive Exploring Art Song Lyrics published by Oxford University Press, where Cheri provides pronunciation and phonetic symbols for more than 750 Italian, German, and French art songs. In addition to all this, and it's just a few titles, right? We have information that Cheri is a singer herself, and that's how Cheri started, and she can tell us more about it. But her performance credits include the operatic roles of Gilda in Rigoletto and the Shepherd Boy in Tosca with the Nashville Opera. Oratory engagement include her appearances with the Knoxville and Nashville Symphonies as soprano soloist for the Messiah. In addition to teaching English, Italian, German, and French lyric diction, she has taught private voice at the Blair School of Music, where she's at right now, for 15 years, and was a mentor voice teacher for the NATS 2019 Summer Workshop. Again, welcome, Cheri.
Thank you for the introduction.
It's a long one, but you've done a lot. You've done a lot for the voice students, for the lyric diction. And would you please just speak to us about your journey, how from being a singer and a voice teacher, you became an educator and a very prolific writer. And by the way, you guys can see all the titles on DictionBuddy website. Please, Cheri.
Yes. Well, I would say it started before I started my education. My father was a voice and diction teacher. Both my parents are native German speakers, so I grew up in a German-speaking home. They were Dutch Mennonites and a part of a Mennonite community in the West. And in their community, it's called the Mennonite Brethren group of religious group. They highly valued education, and they had their own colleges that they sent their members to. So my parents went to college together, and they both sang in the women's choir, and my mom in the women's choir, and my dad in the male quartet. And so they met in college in that it's Tabor College, by the way, in Hillsboro, Kansas. So I grew up, and my father went on to be a regional governor of NATS. He taught at Southern Seminary and at Belmont University. He was chair of the voice department at Belmont University. And so he brought us to Nashville. And I grew up going to class with my father. He loved teaching. And I saw the most joyful expression on his face as he taught voice and diction. So I grew up watching him teach voice, seeing the joy of singing just in his life, and also the joy of language discovery. So he was teaching diction in the days when diction was taught in the language department. So he's really at the forefront of, the time when Madeline Marshall published her book, and then later Evelina Colorni, and then Thomas Grubb and William Odom. So he was in that time period and very excited about the idea of bringing IPA to singers, because before then, the IPA wasn't used. And it was just, they were trying to standardize the symbols. It wasn't readily published. And still, it can be a challenge to publish phonetic symbols. Right. So these books were groundbreaking books. And he began teaching, at the beginning of when diction was offered in the music department. He was one of the first to offer diction. And he had many wonderful conversations, as he has told me over the years, with Bernard and Burton Coffin at Nat's meetings, and just the excitement that was going on during that time surrounding, introducing IPA for singers.
It's pioneering, really.
So yes, I just saw the joy and the excitement in him. And when I went to college, I wanted to make sure that I studied 2 years of every language and really prepared myself to sing operatic repertoire and perform. And so really it started with, my father and watching his joy for teaching. And so I pursued language studies seriously. And I was fortunate enough to, with really 3 days notice before class started, to get the opportunity to teach diction at the Blair School of Music. And so that would be where it started. And many of the Vanderbilt students were ready for advanced diction courses. So really it is in my preparation for class that I developed the workbooks. I wrote these workbooks for them.
Wonderful. That's wonderful.
And then as I was teaching voice, because I taught voice at the same private voice students at the same time, I started to see a correlation between diction and voice and how they have really a symbiotic relationship. So as we see that the face, the mouth, the articulators are all formed for the words that we speak, we can find out that vocal discovery and vowel and consonant formation are interrelated.
But also speaking foreign language is very different than singing in it, right?
Yes.
And when you start teaching, say, young singers, how do you approach that difference? For example, if you have a native, German, come to you and say, oh, I'd like to sing in French, how would you approach that generally? Of course, there are many details and we'll dive in later.
Well, what I love about the topic that you've introduced is I see them as interrelated. And so regardless of what your native language is, if we can have a lyric diction approach to our pronunciation and just really identify that there are really two types of diction for speech, and then another diction for singers. And so I love to think about diction as focusing not on dialect, which is so very obvious, right, in speech, and just breaking down those barriers of dialect, because the topic of dialect can be the source of much confusion in the lyric diction classroom. So if we can take dialect out of it and have a very simple goal of a dialect-free pronunciation of the languages, whether it's English, Italian, German, or French, that is also ideal for singing, then we have something that's very cohesive. Say you're singing in a quartet, we all have a harmonious vowel sound. And so, yes, there are many approaches to teaching diction and excellent books written for the topic of for teaching. But really, when you adopt a book, you are adopting a method of transcription.
You just preempted another question I had for you, and related to different ways of IPA presentation, right? So what was your guidance when you wrote your books on IPA, because you ask anybody and they may have absolutely different perception of what the IPA system would be and how it would represent different languages.
Mm-hmm. Well, I look at it as really just a fortunate series of events. I had 3 days to prepare for my first diction class at Blair. And that semester I was teaching English, Italian, and French. And it was just a sudden find your book, prepare for the first day of class, and prepare for each day as it comes along. So what I had was what was in my dad's library and what I also used when I was in college. And those were the 4 standards that were only available, published by Schirmer at the time. So that's what I had. And as I've continued to write books following my authorities, these 4, I've realized that it's been wonderful that they were so meticulous in their approach to diction. And it's been something that I'll never regret. And I've found that I can easily defend their approach to pronunciation, because they do share this common goal of a dialect-free pronunciation of the language and also ideal for singing. And there's a cohesiveness about the phonetic symbols that they use. So we can approach all 4 languages, or 5 if we include others, 6, 7. We can approach all of them with a similar phonetic language.
Great. So would that be a good segue now at this time to go into the presentation and the material that you wanted to cover, Cheri? I think, yes, this idea of a standardized way to approach a language is key to lyric diction, because as you pointed out, there are a lot of dialects, regional accents. I'm French originally, and I know that the French that I was used to hear when I was a kid is different from the French that I use for French repertoire, especially in the vowel aperture. So I think this is a key for lyric diction. And I'm just going to share the screen to have access to your presentation. So let's see, try to do that.
It's interesting, just feeding off of what you just mentioned, Emma. Many will say, of course we want a dialect-free pronunciation of Italian, French, and German, but as American speakers, we often shy away from this same concept for English. So what I'd love to emphasize is that what is beautiful for Italian, dialect-free, ideal for singing, what is beautiful for French, and what is beautiful, and I would say authentic for German, authentic to the time period in which we sing, is also true for English. It can get very confusing with, as time goes on, more and more dialects, more and more ideas on phonetic symbols and how to transcribe. These all get diluted and can get confusing. So I love the overall idea of a dialect-free for all languages. We don't have to diverge from that just because it's English and our own native tongue. And certainly we are familiar as native English. Those of us who are native English speakers, we are very familiar with the many dialects that we have and how do we use them. Well, we use them in speech. And we can even bring up the point, you can hear contemporary singers and you don't listen to the Beatles and say, oh, that lovely British dialect, because it's dialect is largely not detectable. Although there are some speech sounds that really impede the singing process. And for lyric diction, for a serious study of lyric diction, we can identify these sounds and say, this is what we don't want to sing.
I just want to make one note. That was actually very, very relevant to when I was learning to sing Messiah. And, somebody who has no idea how to pronounce it would just sing the way it's written, Lord, Lord, right? But then that's not how you would sing. You would sing Lord, right? And how would you know this unless you really study, unless you really work with somebody who will tell you this, who's knowledgeable in this lyric diction for singers?
I would say if we could identify the main differences when it comes to singing, I would say R, pronunciation of R is one of the biggest differences between dialects, spoken dialects, and sung diction for English diction are, and also the diphthongs are very different. And so we want to watch those. Okay, so let me see. Where should I start? These are my authorities that I've mentioned: Mellon Marshall in 1946, Evelina Coloni in 70, and then Thomas Grubb in 1979, and then William Odom in 1981. So when we adopt a diction text, we're also adopting a method of transcription.
Mm-hmm.
But I love that I've been able to remain with Marshall, and I would have changed if I could not prove that these work. I would have had to change, which would have been painful.
How did you prove?
By transcribing numerous words. I love that you asked that question because I didn't have to volunteer it. So thank you very much. So since you asked, I will tell you.
Please, yes.
So our chair observed my first year of teaching, and it was not well received. I was not a good teacher. I wasn't effective as a teacher, and I was given excellent advice, and I followed that advice. So the advice was, every student in your class needs their own word list, and they all need to be at the board transcribing their word list. So that is a tall order.
Yeah.
Because we're dealing with multiple languages, and we're dealing with multiple words, and we're dealing with multiple rules, and organizing those words in order of, the rules that are introduced. So I didn't know where to start. All I knew is that I needed a lot of words.
Overwhelming.
Overwhelming. So I searched databases for strictly art songs, and I collected, I believe it's 5,000 art songs, but I've lost count. But it's a number. It's between 3,000 and 5,000, and I'll have to go back. It's on my homepage on my website, but it's a good number of art songs. Then, okay, now all of this work that you see sounds like, that I'm this intellectual. Really, it's computer search functions that have allowed me to do what was previously not possible, not humanly possible. Mm-hmm. So I've taken these art songs, this collection of art songs, extracted the words from the art songs, used computer search functions to organize the spellings of the words. And those words are also organized by order of frequency of occurrence, so that when I write my worksheets, when I write my rule pages, I'm only using the words that occur that they're likely to see, singers are likely to see. So not only did I organize the spellings, just really using computer search functions, I organized the spellings of English, Italian, German, and French. I also applied the phonetics to them so that I could organize them by sound. So it's really computer search functions, and it's going into the project believing that I would find order. And that's been the most gratifying part of my research. I expected to find order in the spellings. And that is a great way to approach any project, because if you can expect to find order and look for order, it will help your research make sense. And so rules start to come together, rules start to make sense, more common sense, when you see some correlation between the languages and then specific things in the language. So it's a lot of common sense once you put the rules together and the spellings and see how they all fit neatly in a box.
A lot of patience, a lot of ability to analyze, and just a very special mind like yours.
Well, it's gratifying. It's gratifying when you start seeing results. And I think of all of the things that I've looked at, the most amazing thing is that you can trust the spellings of the English language. That to me was phenomenal, because we've heard many times how difficult English is. But when you start organizing the spellings of the language, you start to see, wait, there's a reason for every one of these spellings. There are not that many exception rules in the languages. We look at it, we look at the overall language and we say, oh, this is too much. When we actually start to organize the sounds, which that's what my books do, I organize by sound, not by alphabet, right? I go by phonetic symbol. Because that's the easiest way. If you organize by sound, you can then break it down by spelling, which just organizes the whole study, I think, in a more concise way.
See, I think that just explained why you didn't specialize on one language, because you have this ability of seeing patterns. And somebody can say, well, wait a second, we understand why German, you have proclivity towards German lyric diction, right, based on your background. Well, why did you look at French, Italian? I mean, English is your native. Okay, I understand that. And I think you just explained that you see patterns and you're able to categorize those in every language that you wrote books in.
Yes,
right?
and they all show their own beauty, and they all show their own unique order. French is spectacular. When I see French spellings, and I see that those spellings and the pronunciation of the words within the phrase, it looks like the spelling was developed right alongside the actual language. So that's fascinating anyway. So I guess where I'm going with this is that when you adopt a diction text, you're also adopting a method of transcription. So you always want to know why you've chosen the method of transcription, because we all use our symbols in a different way.
Right.
And I'll repeat it again because I think it's worth repeating. My approach is a dialect-free pronunciation of the languages that is ideal for singing. And we won't really know this. You'll know this intuitively, that the way that we sing our words is different from the way that we speak them. But you really won't see it in real life until you actually sing the words. So you want to always, in a diction class, sing your words, because that's where it makes sense. Oftentimes the student will say, you'll say, these are the rules. We want to say Lord and not Lord. And the student will say, but I don't say it that way. Here, did you hear my Southern? I don't say
Yes, you did.
Which I'm embarrassed by, but I cannot change it. It's impossible. So learn to love it, because that's just me, but I wouldn't sing it that way, right? Okay, but a student will say, I don't say it that way. This observation implies that the student expects lyric diction to feel natural. So this is something really important. We want to feel comfortable, right? We want to feel free. We want it to feel open. So we want to identify that the singing formation may not feel natural, especially when speech formations provide the standard for what we consider as, quote, normal. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Before we move on, and I know you've prepared a few more very specific slides, I actually wanted to find out, in your research, have you actually gone to listen to our wonderful, famous singers from the golden age of opera and who are considered to be masters, and how it influenced your research and the results?
Well, I didn't have time to incorporate listening into my research, unfortunately, at the beginning, because I was very busy organizing words and trying to follow my authorities. And I expected to hear their recommendations in the recordings. And then when I had the opportunity to add that in, which I knew it was crucial all along, when I had the opportunity to add that in, I found more nuances. Not that the singers diverged from standard textbook recommendations, but that there are additional sounds not represented by the IPA that really need a symbol. So I began adding symbols when I began to listen. And then I also noticed, especially in Italian, that there are two schools of thought. Evelina Colorni represents the open vowels and unstressed syllables, and the earlier time period. So we're dealing with eras, correct?
Right.
So there was an era in which the vowels, the unstressed E and O, were considered open. You'll hear that in most of our recordings now. But if we listen to, say, early 20th century recordings, we'll hear more closed E and O. So they've moved from the closed to the open, now back to the closed. So that to me, recordings kind of proved that sway in thinking. So in a sense, we might think of it as a return to authenticity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You'll look in every Italian dictionary, they list those symbols as closed, right? They'll list those transcriptions, of of words with unstressed ENO, they'll list that as closed, not open. And Clarny herself will say that in the dictionary, her transcriptions are for singing, and in the dictionary you'll find these as closed. So it's lovely for open sounds, and you may need to, as a voice teacher, adjust to the more open sound. But we also want to be open to the idea that the closed A and is not as tightly, the closed A of Italian is not as tightly closed as the German that has the same symbol.
And all of it is alongside the consideration of vocal technique. And I think that's the most important part. It's a marriage, right, between the two, in addition to all other things, but certainly diction has to take into account, the posture that you have for producing the right sound, especially in operatic singing, right?
Yes, and I also believe that we have to take into consideration the construction of the singer's face. What is their vocal tract? What is the shape of their vocal tract? It might not be ideal for them to sing the same vowel that another singer sings. So you also want to find what is optimal for the singer, and then it's fine adjustments from there as well.
Right. Yes.
Yeah,
I think when you listen to singers in Italian, you often find that sometimes an A is neither closed or open, but kind of in between. And that's where really the IPA, I think, doesn't reflect entirely the subtleties and the nuances of a language. And I know people fight about, the open versus closed unstressed vowels. But the reality is that sometimes it really falls kind of in between, and it's really linked to the vocal technique and what you want to achieve as a singer. So I'm glad that you pointed that out.
I look at the IPA as a very rough guide. It's just a skeleton that we go toward. But we have to make adjustments according to the facial structure of the singer.
Right.
And really, one formation might differ in sound and the resulting sound from singer to singer.
Yeah, and depending where the note is on the staff, that might vary as well, where it's in the phrase. So all this has to be taken into consideration.
To work with the voice teacher to get that right, because they will, they need to feel comfortable with the sound, with the formation, but then they need another set of ears to tell them that the actual sound is accurate.
Right.
And I think I'm just going to bring up DictionBuddy. I think that was one of the main reasons why we even thought that this product would be useful. First of all, for ourselves as singers, right? Because we use it ourselves when needed. And so if it is helpful for us, then we realize that it may be helpful for others. And singers tell us that it's exactly the right assumption.
And it's a unique product. It's great that you're offering this. There's a demand for it, and you're filling that gap.
Thank you. But you're exactly right. Like, in addition to the audio spoken by a native, not just speaker, but diction specialist singer, so that they pronounce correctly for the purpose of singers learning how to pronounce the text. And then I am presenting IPA, and we spoke quite a bit, and I think you have another couple of slides that we'll dive in.
Good time to move in.
Good timing. I think the next topic is the Schwa, right?
Yeah.
So,
yes, the Schwa.
Yay.
The Schwa. What is the Schwa? Okay, the Schwa is the most misunderstood symbol in all of the languages. So let me just say what it is first, or what it is not. It does not represent any sound whatsoever. Now we find, especially in speech, that we need some symbol, something that represents an unstressed syllable, not any specific sound, because that sound can change. It can change due to the stress within the phrase. I could give some examples in English. Now it's well, all he can think, all he can. It goes to all I can do. It depends on your emphasis of the word can as to whether you pronounce it with an a or an So really, we need some symbol that has all this flexibility. And I have to point out that the International Phonetic Association has incorrectly charted this symbol. It does not belong on any phonetic chart. They chart it as a mid-central vowel, which implies that it has the same pronunciation in all languages. And it needs much more flexibility than that. It doesn't need to be charted as any specific sound, because in English, it has 8 pronunciations in speech. For singing, I would say 7. In German, it has 2 pronunciations, and there may be some more subtleties in between, but we have a symbol. We have a symbol, an approximation of the sound for 2 definitions of the schwa for German. And of course, for singing, we have 1 pronunciation of the schwa. Now, in French, but for French speech, there are many pronunciations of the schwa. So the schwa is a necessity of speech, because we cannot define that sound because it's so changeable. But for singing, we sustain the schwa. We need to talk more about the schwa. It's more of a necessary conversation for singers. And I would have to say that singers are more in tune with subtleties of the vowel sounds and also charting of the vowels. I brought up this idea in one of my articles that there is a category missing on the traditional vowel chart. We can take into account tongue slope. Tongue height is one-dimensional, but if we could add tongue slope of the tongue, as an example, E has a steeply sloped tongue, right? Then we can think more clearly about vowel formation.
Interesting.
How's the sound? How's the audio?
I'm hearing a little bit of background noise, but other than that, it's good. We can hear you very well.
It's fixed now.
Correct.
Okay, yeah, I was just checking. So at this point, I guess we need to talk about the slide, okay?
Yes, please go dive in. So,
okay. As I mentioned earlier, you can trust the spellings of languages. Once you start organizing the spellings of them, you see patterns, and even in English, you can trust the spellings. It's very apparent with the pronunciation of the schwa. So we have unstressed syllables in English here. The unstressed syllables in this first column provide the spellings for actual pronunciation of the schwa. So I'll just jump right in. For that first I and why do I have 2 pronunciations for the schwa? See, what am I doing here? I'm defining the schwa. I never want to say that the schwa has to be right? Which meant a lot of times it's easy to assume that it is, because most schwas are pronounced as the sound. But really, the schwa in English is any open vowel. And the open vowels include the central vowels, right? Any but for singing We don't want to sing. You can do this as a never do this. Never sing in an unstressed syllable in English, because it draws the tongue back and up. And the tongue is in the way of the pharyngeal space. So it's not favorable. And then you have that retroflex tongue. So we want to avoid that for unstressed syllables. So aside from it's all open vowels, and those include central, front, and back open vowels. So here I have for the first words garden and faded, I have 2 pronunciations. The schwa in English for certain spellings changes depending on how long the note is held. So let's say I have a short note on the schwa of garden, it would go to I. So you don't know until you sing it. Garden, faded, I, right? If I sustained it, it would move on over to maybe a little color of I in it. Garden, faded. So there are more spellings than that: E-N, E-T, E-T-H, E-D, and E-N-C-E. Those all spellings may be it or depending on how long it's sustained. So I'll give you a few more. Heaven, I'll do only short. Secret, do you hear it in the schwa?
Definitely.
Safe, shaded, absence, absence, absence. We could go to either. Now, for ES endings, as in sweetness. I'm moving to the next row. ES spellings and ENT spellings, those are all they're never anything else. As in sweetness, moment, dearest, fortress, ancient. Those are all words with schwa syllables that have E spellings. So what are we doing here? We're defining the schwa based on spelling. And who would have thought you could trust the spellings of the English language?
Yeah, that's mind-blowing, honestly.
Well, if I may, I will go further. Any vowel plus an L is an symbol, as in angel, gentle. So you can know. I'll do a few more. Travel, crystal, humble is actually LE spelling. And we can go to the next one. OR. Now in speech, we always say savior, color, we go In singing, almost any singer knows intuitively it can't be it has to be some kind of awe. So it's savior, color. I'll do a few more. Comfort, vapor, flavor. We go toward all. Maybe we'll put a little off glide of the vowel after it. Savior, maybe, if it's slow. So that's the story with the schwa spelled with OR. Then we have the schwa spelled with A. So you can take any schwa syllable or unstressed syllable after the stressed, to the right of the stressed. And if it is an A spelling plus a consonant, it is I if it's short and A if it's long, or any mixture of what your voice wants to do. So you have to take into account what your voice loves. Like if your vocal tract really pings and finds its optimal on more of an I sound, then that's the one for you. So you got to give yourself a little play in here. Some just can't go all the way over to A because, as you can tell, A is a very loud vowel, right? It jumps out and slaps you in the face almost. E does too, right? Okay, so maybe not all the way A for these. Fragrant, image. I could do a few more. Distant, thousand. I'm mixing that. You might hear it, a little bit of it, a little bit of A.
Difficult to sing those.
Yeah. We just need to find optimal.
Yeah, but also what makes me think, I write songs myself. So it's very important for the composer, for example, to also be cognizant of a number of things. One of them is voice, of course, but another one is what you're writing and the words that you're putting onto music, how convenient it will be for the singer to sing, exactly because of the things that you're pinpointing right now. You don't want to have fragrance sitting somewhere on an A, high A, sustained. It's just not going to be pretty and very hard for the singer. So why give the schwa in such a position? So all those considerations are very important.
I hadn't thought about that and the value for composers, but I see exactly what you're saying. It helps you understand what is lyrical in terms of setting words in English.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, good. So I'll add these. This is what I found. O and U spellings are and we will include vowel plus R spellings because we want to go to I put that interesting little schwa with an R attached to it, glued to it, as just in red, just to say, you can probably barely see it, just to say this is a speech symbol. I somewhat object to it. I somewhat don't like it because it's telling the schwa that it says something, and I fundamentally disagree with the schwa saying anything. It is a symbol that goes in an unstressed syllable, and we don't want to attach a sound to it until we assign that sound according to what we do within the phrase and the spelling of the word, and whether we're speaking it or singing it. So that's just a little side note. The most common occurring words for I guess welcome is one of the most common, but Jesus is by far the most common word that we sing in lyrics that I searched. So welcome, Jesus, winter, not. And if you have any question about how much R to put in there, you won't speak it, you'll sing it. And so obviously we don't want to sing winter, I mean, you could maybe, but it's not best if you're, say, singing over an orchestra or you want just to find optimal for your voice.
Mm-hmm.
I need to get you ladies to sing for me because I can't imagine the lovely sounds our listeners would get to hear. So you're next.
Oh.
You can do a one-upper here, I know. Okay, final A. Final A spellings are ah. So would you intone these for me, Vita?
Sure.
Oh, good. I can't wait.
Well, I think you want me to indicate the prolonged R, sustained excuse me, not R, A, right?
Yes, it'll be dark ah, Father ah.
Opera, Gloria, right?
That's it. Good. May I ask you to sing the words idea and sofa and see how those final A's are actually Idea, sofa.
Idea, sofa.
Good. Now, if there's any confusion, you could try the ah. Could you sing those with an ah, Schwa? Idea and sofa.
Let me think. Idea, sofa.
Right. So it could be either.
But it's unstressed, right? And that's why it's different from opera.
Right. Right. And those are details, right? That you have to decide with another set of ears. And I don't know. How do you see that?
I think the music will dictate, right? I think that he would go back to composer, writing the music and giving certain value of the notes and seeing how syllables fall into those notes. Because, I mean, it would be absolutely absurd to have idea, right? Opera. It doesn't make any sense. And so the great composers had knowledge and talent and appreciation, but also certainly skill to not write something like this, some nautical phrases that have prolonged value note in appropriate places. You know, Tchaikovsky, I'm going to speak about the Russian ones. That's my background. Tchaikovsky was a genius about that. And you can literally just go by the value of the notes to see how naturally the language flows and all the words fall into the right places. You don't need to question where the stress is. What you have at your disposal is the value of the note, because it emphasizes the natural stress of the word.
And I would love to add that if you choose the wrong vowel, and it's more of what I call a louder vowel, it distorts the shape of the phrase.
Oh, absolutely.
That's so.
Emma, we have a question, I think. Can you see it?
What?
Related to this discussion, I think it would be interesting to respond.
Let me show it. Do you advocate for completely replacing the schwa in IPA transcriptions with the symbols you include in this chart? And this is a question from Steph.
Thank you for that question, Steph. English is a complicated language to teach in the amount of time most of us are given. So I add it as advanced information. So I would love to just say, this is a schwa. You can put in parentheses, as I have here, bescheidene in parentheses to say, the student knows that this is a schwa, and this is my interpretation of the schwa. So that's the direction I'm moving. But in my English lyric diction workbook, I'm retaining the schwa. In my French lyric diction workbook, I'm retaining the schwa. It's a valid symbol as long as we remember that it must be defined and it doesn't have a sound until we define it. And again, since it's so flexible, right? It needs this flexibility depending on how long the note. We don't really know until we see it in the music, in the context of the music. So I would say if they're ready to indicate it, let's not throw out the schwa altogether, but if they're ready to indicate an idea in parentheses, it's great that they have some additional information. And would you like to move on to German then?
Let's move on to German, yes.
Okay.
Thank you for the question, Steph. We appreciate your participation.
So for German, it's frequently or widely taught that the schwa rhymes with surrounding syllables. I firmly disagree with this, although I won't say they're wrong. I'll just say I do it differently. Let's put it that way. I found patterns and then I compared it to native German singers. This is where I go. I'm not an authority on all of the languages, but I certainly can point the singers to native singers. And that's where we want to go. Native singers singing who are classically trained, right?
Yeah.
So for words, I found that in German, it is completely based on spelling, just like English. So let's go with the two pronunciations, and It's really the English The German symbol, is more closed, right? But this is more of the almost a weakened version of that German symbol. Okay, so we'll go with that. All of the schwas in German are except when they're not. And here's when they're not. When they're not, it's when it's final in the element. So if it's a final E of the element, maybe it's a prefix. Maybe it's the final schwa of the word, right? No other letters following it. It is the horseshoe looks like that if I could do hand language. Sign language, right? Or if it's followed by a vowel R. So we have Frieden, Lächeln, and then the those are the S, and then the Us are Liebe, Vater, and then the is final in an element, bescheidene. Bescheidene. Now I have a speech symbol in red over there. That symbol, it looks like an upside down A, but it's the sound. It is perfect for speech, but not ideal for singing, because we don't want our color in that sustained schwa. So I don't want to merge the the vowel R, right, with a schwa, which is right? Bescheidene, and then tag on the vowel R at the end. So I love to use that vowel R. It really originated with Zeep's dictionary, 1969 dictionary, and then William Odom used it in his text. It's actually no longer considered a valid symbol for this sound, but I have no other symbol that represents this little brief vowel R in German, which the formation is that the tongue tip is down. So I have to continually explain and defend this, because it's not, everyone looks the word up in the dictionary and finds that vowel R, which is the upside down A looking symbol, and then wonders why I'm using a symbol that is not actually a symbol for that sound anymore. So, the International Phonetic Alphabet has gone through changes. So I'm still going to agree with my authority, because at least it gives me a symbol that allows me to separate the schwa, the sustained schwa, from the R sound.
So what do you feel really the reason for omitting certain things in the modern approach to IPA? Is it just a desire for simplicity rather than accuracy, dare I say?
I would say that are you speaking about current usage of the IPA?
What you mentioned about this symbol that is not used in a kind of widespread manner,
right?
And I think that the reason why you're using it is to be very accurate for circumstances where it appears. Yet, as you're saying, it's not widely used. So I'm just trying to kind of understand what the real reason for it is.
For lyric diction, we are so specialized with creating a pronunciation that's for singers. And we have to sustain the vowels. We have to, in many cases, make adjustments and even invent symbols because they don't exist in phonetics. So this is more part of what we have to do for lyric diction, to use the tools that we can find. And this is the only thing, there is no symbol that exists that gives me a short vowel R for German.
And that's when audio recording comes in.
I'm sorry?
That's when audio recording comes in for those nuances that are not covered by IPA, for example.
Right. we have to have a different IPA system in some cases, adding symbols, but we definitely want to keep it as simple as possible. I love simplicity. I don't want to add more symbols just for the sake of making, too much out of the detail, because we can define many of these symbols within the language, which really leads me to the next slide, except for the word chevalier. In French, it's very simple, and I'm going with Grubb here. He describes the schwa as the glue of the French language, and I love that saying. I've learned so much from Thomas Grubb about the schwa. In fact, I really don't think I understood it until I had some conversations with him. And so I go with him when we listen to Bernac and we listen to others who are reliable recordings and reliable artists who sing in French. We hear that OE schwa, and it really brings the phrase together and gives cohesiveness to the phrase.
I think it would be, and thank you so much for this. It's very detailed, fantastic. I think it's going to be very useful for our viewers. I think it would be also important to bring up the name of Nico Castell.
Yes.
In this conversation in particular. What is your perspective on the massive works that he produced over the course of his research?
That's a difficult question. I believe that he needed to define how vowels are sung according to the register. So this is a very involved process of transcription that he provides. So he will open the vowels for higher registers. Now, if I'm misunderstanding him, please forgive me. This is the best I understand. Now, I was required to compare my method of transcription when I published my transcriptions for Oxford. Mm-hmm. The panel of reviewers, what I did in order to request that they publish my transcriptions and our book was to write a defense of my transcription and compare it to other methods of transcription. So where my method of transcription did not match up with other standard authorities, I was required to discuss it at length. So I did that. And then they said, we want to publish it. And that was a surprise to me. So I have compared other methods of transcription. And what I see sometimes is this fine adjustment that Nico Castell makes in his transcriptions for Italian of the range. And there are a few other small things. And if you're ever interested in why I transcribe the way I do and comparing it to other methods, it was required that I do this huge comparison and then publish it in the appendix of the Oxford text, Exploring Art Song Lyrics.
Well, thank you for this.
There are details that I add. I think I could just kind of overview some of my strengths instead of talking about the other strengths, because I'm not as familiar with their work. My strengths in Italian are that I indicate the long vowels in vowel clusters. That's a new thing. Mm-hmm. Just as in single words, we would say mio. There's a long vowel in a vowel cluster and a short vowel. Mm-hmm. Well, it's also true within the phrase. When we have a vowel cluster within the phrase and it's several words, maybe 2 words, maybe 3 or 4 even, there is a vowel that is considered syllabic or long. So I always indicate this in my transcription. So that's a strength of my Italian transcriptions. A strength of my French transcriptions is that I've found additional spellings because I've organized the spellings. And so I've found additional spellings that define some of the nuances in French.
Well, maybe it's a good time, and thank you for the share. I know it's been one of the toughest questions, but it's the conversation calls for it. I think you have another slide.
Yes, we have other slides. So let's go to the front vowels.
This is a good time to move into the other sounds that I've discovered spellings for. I'll just briefly mention that these sounds are defined for each language. So when I start when I introduce a new language, I compare it to English. We say see or greet or heat or field. In Italian, it's very fronted, ivi, vita, and sospiri. In German, it's just as strong, lit or im or liba or dir. And in English, if we want to borrow this E, we can, but that's something that you could work with your teacher or another set of ears that could give you an opinion there. And in French, it's that same ici, vi, hiver, or hiver for French. And then I mentioned the stress of the different languages. Stress is formed differently in each language. In Italian, the pitch rises and they elongate the vowel of the stressed syllable. In German, it could be long or short, depending on the spelling, but there's a weighted stress in German, whereas in the Romance languages, for singing in French and Italian, there's not weight. There's only length in French. So these things I think are important to point out, but we don't have that much time for that.
And it will depend on the phrasing, right? Of what you're singing, and the whole phrase of the language will be dictated by that as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there's even more to it.
Stuff, yeah.
The E, I'd just like to point out that it's very frontal in German. Then we can go to the A, which has many sounds we can talk about. We have a very weak A in English. It's not all the way A as in Erde in German, but in English, it's much weaker. Words like chaotic and etude or fiancé, we have a bit of that A sound in our language. And it's weak in it's that similar, almost weakened vowel in Italian. We don't want to take the German E of Erde and apply it to the Italian perché. It's just not that. Perché is too tight. Or ghetto, or entra, or merce. It's not so tight. Then we have really up to 3 pronunciations of that vowel, of that symbol in French. So we have very tightly closed in a word like the last syllable of lycée. It's all the way A, but it's a bit weaker in the first syllable. Lycée. You don't hear lycée, right? You hear a bit more open in the first syllable. Lycée. Plaisir. Chez. Oh, then it's all the way closed. Chez été. Those are pure A. Mm-hmm. But then if you have a word like, I'll go to the row below that. If you have a word like rêve, it's all the way open. Rêve. I don't speak French, so Emma, could you pronounce that word for me?
Rêve.
There we go. There you go. Very good. Mm-hmm. So
you're pretty good, Emma. Where did you learn that?
I don't know.
And then what about the next word? How about you sing the word for us, Emma?
The mais.
Mm-hmm.
Mais.
Yes, and we'll look those words up in the dictionary, and they both have an open air, right?
Right, they do. And you know where I come from the southeast of France, we close it, which is not right. But I agree that the symbol that you have, which is the semi-open, or I don't know how you call it, but it's kind of in between A and A. It's mais.
And this leads into another wonderful conversation. When we look words up in the dictionary, we'll see the little articles, laissez, mais words. We'll see them sometimes in the dictionary as closed A.
Yes, because when we speak, we tend to close them, c'est, mais, les. And in lyric diction, it's often advocated as open, but it's kind of in between as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's neither closed. Some dictionaries will even indicate them as open. That right there, seeing the differences in the dictionary transcription gives us a clue that they don't know which it is because it's neither. And we need some symbols that indicate those in-between sounds.
But see, I mean, it's just so fascinating, right? What singers have to care about and keep in mind. Not only do you have an IPA that may not sometimes exactly show you the nuances, it's very effective. I don't want to discount it by any means. I mean, we're talking about it. It's just so fascinating. Then you need to also actually listen, right? And that's what we provide. Then you also need to go, like you indicated, to a coach and work with your voice teacher, right? To make sure that you're not closing your throat when you're saying, that you're not doing anything you're supposed to from technical reasons for the voice, but also from the reasons of musicality, how the phrasing goes, and just so many aspects of it.
So I've given a few new symbols. I put the E in parentheses on laissé to indicate an ever so slightly released A. And you mentioned it, I think you mentioned semi-closed vowel. And then on the may, I put a line, I crossed through that open edge just to say, this is a slightly different symbol. It's a little bit more closed. If we have time, we could go through a few more slides, or
yes, and there is a question from Kofi, so I'm just going to put it on the screen. What are your thoughts on the use of diacritical marks in IPA?
I just prefer a simpler transcription. It's just my method. And I'm not sure, I don't know enough about how they're used to know what their purpose is. So I don't use diacritical. You're talking about the grave and the acute marks and circumflex, diacritical marks. Is that what we're referring to?
Most probably.
Yes, I don't see any answer right now.
And so my transcriptions are kind of bare bones, but where I need to define it, I try to define it. So it's, I would say, simple, clean, because there are times when we need to use long marks and it could get really cluttered. So I prefer to define each symbol in the language itself.
Yes.
So
we have a comment from Steph. Emma, if you'd like to show Cheri.
Sure.
Yes, so it's Steph again. Thanks so much for this discussion. Interesting ideas, so clearly articulated and presented. Thank you so much, Steph, for your comments. And thank you, Cheri.
We should finish. Cheri, you have one
more slide, so
right?
let's go to the next one.
Now these details, so we just did the front vowels and compared them to the different languages. Just to mention quickly, the back vowels, when we're referring to Italian, German, and French, are more similar than the front vowels without the need for additional distinctions. And then we can go to the next slide.
Okay.
The same is true for the central vowels. Aside from English, which English is its own entity, the Italian, German, and French bright ah in the space that we need for singing and the dark ah don't have a lot of differences between the languages in the space that we need for singing. So those that are native speakers may hear some more distinctions, but these sounds are just louder in the front vowels, if that makes sense. Because the nature of E and the strength of E and the way that it projects. This is an opinion. I'm sure there are other great conversations on this. But I'm just presenting what I can see in a quick way. We could discuss some fine details at another time. So we can move to the next slide.
Yes, mixed vowels.
Mixed vowels do have some interesting differences between the German and the French, especially when we're talking about sung pronunciation and spoken. So we have blüte, E, tongue, and U, lip, and we have sur. In French, it's not that tight, rounded lip. And Thomas Grubb is recommending that it's almost an open O lip for sur, but it's not so tight, and he's identified this. And then we have Küsse in German. And we'll notice that we retain more of the I sound in singing than what you'll observe in speech. So they go to Kuss, right? Küsse in German in speech. But we always hear our native German singers sing more I in the sound. So we'll hear more color of I in Küsse for singing. Then we go over to schön. We have an A tongue, an O lip, but we have an added color. So we never want to, as the textbook authorities say, we never want to leave these formations that are recommended. It still is a tongue of a, lip of O, but we need to add the color of So schön has that color because we're thinking color, not actually retroflexing the tongue. Now in German, we have in French, we have no R color in their O slash. Theirs has more of an color. So it's A tongue, O lip, F. It sounds like as in look, So F, and we just want to add the color in because if we think of it as an added color, the differences between these symbols, then we won't change or alter the formation that's correct for these sounds. So we go schön, little R, color, f, little color. They sound very different.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll go to können, which in the spoken version, you hear more in there, können, right? Können. But for speech, for singing, we want all the color we can find, können, because it sings well, and that's what we're hearing from native German singers.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so in French, it's different. They have more, again, of a color in it. But because the tongue is at and the lip is off for a word like seul, it has very much across the teeth feel, very much of a horizontal feel. Seul. And then we go back to f, which is more of a vertical feel. They both have a color, but something about that fronted tongue with A and the very tall O lip rounding makes it feel vertical. So we have f and seul almost across the teeth. So
Emma, I think it's time for you to
feel.
help out, pronounce.
So, seul, cœur,
Yeah. I'm sorry?
cœur,
Cœur.
mm-hmm. Fleur.
Mm-hmm. What about, let me see, what do we have in French that I can give you for the O slash? We have words, let's see.
Bleu, yeux,
Mm-hmm. Heureux.
heureux,
Did you say adieu?
adieu,
Mm-hmm. And then let's compare it to the OE.
cœur,
Mm-hmm.
fleur, l'heure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have time?
More protrusive, right?
We have one more slide on the nasal vowels, I believe, right?
We have time for this then, huh?
Sure, yeah.
We need to talk about the nasal vowels. Come on.
Okay.
Especially in French.
We do. I'd love to. And I have to give Grub all the credit here. He has been a huge help. I visited his class in 2011. I visited his class. He was so gracious to allow me to visit and then discuss the sounds with me. And I'm eternally grateful to him for his generosity in doing this. He helped me understand so many things about this, about giving instructions to students on how to form these vowels. So I'm following his instruction here. Mm-hmm. For the A nasal, he says that the French mouth needs an open O, right?
Yes.
Formation.
Yeah.
So this could be, just so we don't have overnasality, open all, and I think we've heard this, maybe he's been teaching this and we know this now, but it was new to me.
Yeah, I attended one of his master classes, and he advocated for the open O, and I think it's exactly right, because if it's too open, it's going to sound wrong, and too like this, it's so you need to
So Emma, could you sing these words vent, don, and enfant?
Vent, don, enfant.
Okay, there's your example. Yeah. For those of you who are listening, that's perfect. And then we go to the closed O, which Thomas Grubb created this symbol. It is actually an open O. He made a new symbol. So we are not the only ones to create new symbols, and he's the master of these sounds. As an authority and someone who was Bernac's coach, correct? He worked with Bernac in recitals and master classes all over the world. So he has created this new symbol, which is an O, closed O, with the nasal marking over it. So Emma, if you could sing mode, l'ombre, chanson, if you want to add that one.
Mode, l'ombre, chanson.
So you all hear the difference between the first syllable of chanson and the second.
Yes, and I know that sometimes the O nasal in some dictionaries is denoted with an open O nasal, but it's too open. So we need to really differentiate the dark A, which is based on the open O, and the O, which is based on the closed O, as you pointed out. So,
Well, and you're mentioning this because you know the value of differentiating between the A nasal and the O nasal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay, now this one surprised me. It took him a while to help me understand this because I was singing what I hear in speech and what I hear many French singers sing, saint, point, jardin, bien, more of a ah sound underneath the nasality. Of course, we maintain that ah tongue, but I was mimicking what I heard, which was an ah color. Now, this may be obvious to you, but this was brand new to me. He told me that we need to go for classical sung French or for the French of Paris and the French that is dialect free and the highest form of the language toward an pronunciation. And he tells me this is extinct. So maybe you guys are very familiar with this. You ladies are familiar with So should I give an example?
Yes, please.
Okay. So it's not ça, because that's current spoken French. The classical pronunciation and the dialect free, best for singing, has more in the sound. So, saint, point, jardin, bien.
Yes, that makes sense.
Okay.
Because the open A, I think if we keep the pure open A, maybe it's going to be a little bit too spread in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the central vowel kind of refocuses the sound in a way. That's how I understand it. But it's a little. This one is a little bit tricky.
It's exactly right. It has a vertical feel according to his instruction. So sa point as opposed to sa point,
Yes.
which is not so lyrical.
Right.
How about Emma?
I'm sorry. I think that the sound that you produced before the correct one, it's actually going to take out the column, take out a voice out of alignment. It has a very high risk of doing so. Yeah.
It's a good point. And it's kind of like I said there, I view some vowels as being loud. And that ah is a very loud, it cuts through and distorts the phrase in many ways.
Yeah.
It jumps out. Maybe you need it for color in some cases. It's not recommended for standard French. Would you mind, Emma, singing the words saint, point, jardin, and bien?
Saint, point, jardin, bien.
Mm-hmm.
Saint, point, jardin, bien.
Thank you so much. Lovely. Lovely. Okay, then we have the sound. So we agreed that the saint is like an sound and it's vertical. Well, the is horizontal and it's more like horseshoe sorry. So parfum, and then I guess I'd like to show both of them in the words jardin. Jardin.
Jardin. Jardin.
And
jardin.
Yes, that was good. And
jardin.
Okay, let's do this first. Let's do all words. We'll go un parfum, humble, and chacun. Yeah, it's lovely. Oh, yeah.
So for me, the key is to really round the OE nasal. Yeah, because if you don't round it, it's going to sound more like the of sound.
Thank you. I'm so glad you mentioned it. I'm thinking so much of color that I forget to round. Excellent. Could we do, and now I'm going to round. Here goes. Jardin. Could we try that, singing that? Right. Oh, you guys, that's great. So we managed to make it through all of the slides.
Yeah.
That's a lot of work. Oh my God, Cheri.
Oh, thank you.
Such an amazing analytical mind that you have, because that certainly requires talent. Not everybody can do it for sure. And then seeing patterns, being so passionate that you are to describe it so clearly with examples. I mean, it's just fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time on Sunday we are very happy that you're our guest, and we're ecstatic to have had you on our live cast.
Thank you so much. I love the opportunity. This was so much fun. Thank you. And I tell my students this: I'm not the authority, but I can point you to the authorities. So again, it's about listening to classically trained native singers.
And now that we have that tool that should help singers with at least doing their prep work with DictionBuddy, I think.
Absolutely.
On the go, on the cell phone, it's really easy. So I think they're going to be many happy students and happy coaches with students who come prepared.
Very, very good.
Wonderful.
Excellent.
Thank you so much, everybody who watched us. We appreciate your participation, and we really thank you for being with us this afternoon. See you next time.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Cheri.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.